Louie Anderson, was in the middle of making 300 people laugh when his legs stopped working. It was October 4th, 1988. The Tonight Show studio at NBC Burbank was doing what it always did on a Tuesday, filling with warmth and the hum of expectation. The band had just finished a tight fanfare, and Louie Anderson, 35 years old, one of the most naturally gifted comedians in America, was 2 minutes into a bit about his mother's cooking when something changed in his face. Not dramatically, not in the way you'd see it coming, just a quiet going away behind his eyes. His right hand reached for the microphone stand. His voice dropped half a register, and then Louie Anderson, the man Johnny Carson himself had once called the most naturally gifted comedian I've seen in a decade, went straight down onto the stage floor without another word. The audience didn't understand it at first. Some of them laughed. They thought it was a bit. They thought the big, warm man from Minnesota had found a new way into a punchline. But Johnny Carson, watching from behind his desk, knew the difference. He had seen Louie perform 9 times on this stage alone. He had watched this man turn a childhood of poverty and fear into the kind of comedy that made people cry from laughing. What he saw in that moment, a man not playing at falling but actually falling, made him do something he had never done in 26 years of hosting The Tonight Show. He walked out from behind his desk, not toward the commercial break, not toward his producer, toward Louie. What happened in the next 19 minutes would not air that night. NBC replaced the segment with archive material. The audience was quietly asked not to discuss what they had witnessed. For several years, it was simply a night that did not exist on paper. But one young camera operator named Dennis Farwell kept a private journal. And in a 1994 radio conversation that was never meant for broadcast, Johnny Carson let 9 minutes of it slip, describing, without naming names, the most honest conversation he had ever had on that stage. What emerged is one of the most quietly devastating, most deeply human stories in Tonight Show history. But to understand what broke Louie Anderson on that stage, you need to understand what built him. If this story already has something pulling at you, hit that like button right now and tell me in the comments where you are watching from tonight. Because where this goes next, you need to be ready for it. Louis Perry Anderson was born on March 24th, 1953, in St. Paul, Minnesota, the 10th of 11 children. 11 children, one small house, one paycheck that was never enough, and one father named Lou Anderson Sr., who came home from work every evening carrying something heavier than exhaustion, a rage with no bottom, directed at the people who could not escape it. Lou Sr. drank. He raged.
Before we continue our video, I'd like to say something. I often see comments from people who didn't realize they weren't subscribed. If you enjoy the channel, please take a second to check and make sure you're subscribed. It's free, and it really helps us keep the show growing. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.
He said things to his children that lived in the body, not just the memory. Louie would later describe his childhood in his stand-up with such precision that audiences always laughed. But it was the nervous kind, the kind that happens when a truth gets too close. What Louie never said on stage was that his father was also, in some buried and complicated way, the reason he became a comedian. Not because Lou Sr. was funny, he was not. But because when you grow up in a house where one man's moods determine whether dinner is peaceful or terrifying, you become a student of timing. You learn to read a room at the cellular level. You learn that making someone laugh, the right laugh, at the right second, can buy you safety. Louie Anderson did not discover comedy. He was manufactured by the necessity of it. By 1984, Louie had been doing stand-up for 8 years. He was 31, largely unknown outside the club circuit, working rooms where the sticky floor was part of the atmosphere. And then came the call that changed everything. The Tonight Show wanted him for a 5-minute stand-up slot. He later said he did not sleep for 4 days. He drove to NBC Studios that Tuesday afternoon and sat in the green room for 3 hours, eating every piece of food he could find, which was his body's way of announcing it was terrified. What happened that night is one of the genuine fairy tales of late-night television. Louie walked out. He did his 5 minutes. He killed, completely, the way an audience surrenders to a performer when the performer is telling the truth. And when he finished, when he turned to walk back toward the curtain, Johnny Carson did something he almost never did. He called the comedian back. "Come on over here," Johnny said, pointing to the guest chair beside his desk. "Sit down." In the language of late-night television, that gesture is everything. It means you are not just an act, you are a person worth knowing. Johnny pointed at that chair for perhaps a dozen comedians in his entire career. And now for this big, soft-spoken kid from Minnesota who had just made the studio audience feel something they were not expecting to feel. They talked for 12 minutes. Louie's career changed overnight. But here is what Louie told almost no one. The night after that first Tonight Show appearance, after the calls and the congratulations, Louie telephoned his father. Lou Sr. answered on the third ring. Louie told him what had happened. The chair, Carson saying his name, the audience responding the way they did. There was a long pause, and Lou Sr. said, "Well, don't let it go to your head." That was the whole conversation. Louie said goodnight, hung up, and sat alone in his apartment for a very long time. Subscribe right now, because what happens between that phone call and October 4th, 1988, is the part of this story nobody has told in full. And what Johnny Carson does when he walks out onto that stage floor is something that will stay with you. Between 1984 and 1988, Louie appeared on The Tonight Show 9 times. Each appearance was sharper than the last. His bits about his family had become the centerpiece of his act. He had learned what every great comedian eventually learns, that the most dangerous material is also the most powerful, and that audiences can always feel the difference between a wound that has healed and one that has not. The ones that have not healed are always the funniest. They are always the most expensive to perform. Louie Anderson Sr. died on September 14, 1988. Heart failure. He was 74 years old. Louie was on tour in Ohio when the call came. He finished the show he was in the middle of, because that is what you do when you have been trained since childhood to perform regardless of what is happening inside. And then he drove to his hotel and did not come out for 2 days. He did not cry. He told a close friend at the time that he did not know how to cry about it. Did not know which version of his father he was supposed to be grieving, the man who terrified him, or the man beneath that, or the father he had needed and never fully gotten. All 3 of them had died on September 14th, and Louie had no framework for any of it. His manager called on the 3rd day. There were shows to play. A Tonight Show booking in 3 weeks. Did Louie want to push it? Louie said no. He would do it. He should not have. Everyone around him knew it. But Louie Anderson had spent his entire life performing through pain, and he did not know another way to exist. October 4th, 1988. 3:15 in the afternoon. Johnny Carson arrived at NBC Studios and found a note on his dressing room mirror from his producer, Peter Lassily. It said simply, "Heads up on Louie. He lost his father 3 weeks ago, still doing the show. Watch him." Johnny read it twice, folded it, put it in his jacket pocket. He had lost his own father, Homer Kit Carson, in 1963. Kit had been a quiet, emotionally distant man, the kind who showed up physically and disappeared in every other way. Johnny had spoken about him only rarely, always with the careful neutrality of someone who had decided long ago that it was safer to feel nothing than to feel the wrong thing. He understood, in a way that had nothing to do with sympathy and everything to do with recognition, what it meant to grieve a man you never quite reached. In the green room that afternoon, Louie Anderson sat by himself. The stage manager, a veteran named Russell Pierce, walked in with the 10-minute warning and found Louie staring at nothing. His hands were quiet in his lap. "You good, Louie?" Louie looked up and smiled. It was a complete, professional, airtight smile, the kind that comedians build until it can hold any amount of weight without showing a crack. "Never better," he said. Russell Pierce would tell Dennis Farwell later that he almost believed it. Almost. The taping began at 5:30 p.m. Johnny's monologue was sharp. Everything was where it was supposed to be. Louie Anderson was introduced at 6:08. He came out to strong applause, wearing a light gray suit he had altered 3 times to get right. He picked up the microphone and launched immediately into a bit about airport security and the particular suffering of a large man trying to compress himself into a middle seat. The audience was with him in 10 seconds. 2 minutes in, he pivoted, started talking about his family, about growing up in Minnesota, about his mother's cooking, and then, quietly, without announcing it, He started talking about his father. This was not unusual territory. His father material was the spine of his act. But something was different tonight. The usual architecture was not there. The timing was slightly off, not enough for the audience to notice. Enough for Johnny Carson to sit forward in his chair. My dad, Louie said, was the kind of man who, when you did something good, he stopped. He looked down at the microphone. He was the kind of man who, when you finally got somewhere, when you actually got somewhere, his right hand went to the microphone stand. The audience was quiet now, reading the energy of a performer who had stopped being a performer. He never, Louie said, and that was all he said. His knees went first. Then the rest of him, slowly, like something that had been standing too long under too much weight and had made a quiet decision. He sat down on the stage floor. Not hard, not dramatically. He just sat down, the way a person does when their legs have made a decision their brain has not approved yet. The audience went completely silent. Johnny Carson was already moving. Do not go anywhere. Because what Johnny did next, and what Louie said when Johnny reached him, is the part of this story that changes everything. In 26 years of hosting The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson had developed a response for nearly every category of unexpected event that television could produce. What he did not have a plan for was this. He came around the desk without looking at his producer. Without acknowledging the cameras, he walked across the stage at a pace fast enough to say this is urgent and slow enough to say nothing is wrong. A balance that only decades of stage presence can produce. And he sat down on the floor next to Louie Anderson, not beside him in the way of a host managing a situation. Next to him, shoulder to shoulder, the way people sit when one of them is in trouble and the other one is not going anywhere. The audience made a sound that was not quite a gasp and not quite silence. Something in between. 300 people recalibrating what they thought they were watching. Ed McMahon leaned forward in his chair but did not speak. The cameras kept rolling. Hey, Johnny said, quietly, not into a microphone. Louie looked at him. His eyes were dry, but there was something behind them that had been building all evening. Something under pressure, looking for a seam. I don't know what happened, Louie said. Yeah, you do, Johnny said. A long pause. September 14th, Louie said. Johnny nodded slowly. I have been doing bits about him for 3 weeks, Louie said. Every night on the road, I go out there and I do the material. And the distance is still there. You know what I mean? The distance between the joke and the thing underneath the joke. That distance is the whole job. That is how you do this. He paused. Tonight I got up here and I started talking about him and the distance was gone. There was nothing between me and it. And I did not know what to do with that. Johnny was quiet for a moment. He never came to a show, Louie said. His voice had dropped to something barely above conversational. 4 years of doing this nationally. My mother came. My brothers, my sisters. Not him. He shook his head. I always thought that if I got big enough, he'd have to come. He'd walk in and see all those people laughing at the things I built out of our family, out of all of it, and he'd look at me the way I always needed him to look at me. A long pause. He never came. No, Johnny said quietly, and now he can't. Louie's voice broke cleanly on the last word. Not loudly, not with any drama. Just a single fracture in the sound, the way a branch breaks in cold weather. And the only thing I keep thinking, every single day since September, is that I kept doing this for him. Every show, every audience, every time somebody laughed in the dark. I was doing it for him, trying to become something he would want to look at. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth, and I never told him that. I never said, Dad, this is for you. And now I can't say it. And I don't know how to do the show anymore. I don't know who I'm doing it for. The studio was completely still. Not a cough, not a shift in a seat. Dennis Farwell wrote in his journal that night, I have worked this show for 3 years. I have never felt anything like this room. Nobody moved. It felt like everybody understood, without being told, that this was not a moment to interrupt. From somewhere in the audience, soft and deliberate, a woman began to clap. Not applause, something slower and more considered. The person next to her joined, then another, and another, until the whole studio was producing a low, steady sound that was not quite applause and not quite anything else, Just acknowledgement. 300 people saying, "We are here. We see this. We are not going anywhere." Louie looked up at the sound. He looked genuinely surprised, the way people look when they have been so deep inside their own pain that they forgot there was a world outside of it. "They're still here," he said. "They're always still here," Johnny said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I tell you something?" Louie looked at him. "My father and I—" Johnny paused, choosing words with the care of a man who has kept a particular door closed for a very long time and is deciding right now to open it. "We were not close. He was a quiet man. Good man, I think, but the kind of quiet that keeps everyone at arm's length. I spent a lot of years being angry about it. Then a lot of years pretending I wasn't. Then he died in 1963, right when I was taking over this job." He looked at his hands, "And I did exactly what you have been doing. I went back to work. I went on television every night and made people laugh, because I did not know what else to do with it." Louie's shoulders were moving very slightly, very quietly, with the particular trembling of someone who has been postponing something for weeks and has finally run out of the strength to keep going. "Men like that," Johnny continued, "men who grew up hard, who got squeezed into a shape they didn't choose. They can't always say what they feel in a language their kids can receive. It doesn't mean the feeling isn't there. It just means the distance between the feeling and the words is too far for them to cross." He paused. "That doesn't mean he wasn't proud, Louie. It means he didn't know how to tell you." Louie was fully crying now. Quietly. Without drama. The way grown men cry when the body finally overrules the decision not to. "What do I do with the act?" he said. "I don't know how to do those bits anymore. Every time I start, it's just real. It's not a bit anymore. It's completely real." Johnny thought about that. "Maybe," he said slowly, "that is not the problem you think it is. The funniest people I've ever known, the ones who lasted, they all went through a moment like this, where the distance closed up and the material stopped being safe, where there was nowhere left to hide behind the joke." He was quiet for a moment. "That is usually when they stopped being funny and started being great. There is a difference. And you know there is a difference. If you are not subscribed yet, do it right now. What happens when they stand up from that floor? And what Louie says before he walks off that stage is what this entire story has been building toward. They sat on that floor for 11 minutes. Dennis Farwell wrote, "Nobody moved in the audience. Nobody checked a watch. It was like the room had made a collective decision to just be present for whatever was happening. I have been in television for years. I have never felt anything like it." At some point, Louie picked up the microphone from where it had come to rest on the floor beside him. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Johnny. "Can I try something?" he said. Johnny nodded. "Whatever you need." Louie got to his feet. Johnny rose with him, not helping, just rising at the same moment, the way you stand when the person beside you stands. For a moment, they were both upright on that stage, and Dennis Farwell wrote that it was the most honest thing I've ever seen on a television stage. Not a performance, not a moment. Two people just standing up. Louie faced the audience. "My dad died 3 weeks ago," he said. His voice was level, the voice of a man who has decided to tell the truth in the simplest possible way. "I have been trying to do comedy about it for 3 weeks, because that is what I know how to do. Tonight I found out that I am not ready." He exhaled slowly, which is probably ironic, since my whole act is basically 20 minutes about my dad every night. He paused. He never saw a show. Not this show, not any show. I kept thinking if I got big enough, he'd have to come, that he'd walk in and see all those people laughing, and he'd look at me the way I always needed him to. He looked down, then back up. He never came, and now he can't, and I still don't know how to make it funny. But the man sitting next to me just told me that's maybe not the problem I think it is. He nodded slowly, almost to himself. "So I'm going to go home. I'm going to figure out what comes next. And when I come back," he looked sideways at Johnny. "I am coming back. Back to the audience. When I come back, I think it's going to be different. I think it might be something my dad would have wanted to see if he'd known how to get there." The studio rose. All 300 people on their feet, with an ovation that Dennis Farwell described in his journal as "not like a performance ending, more like something starting. Johnny stepped forward and put his hand on Louie's shoulder. Not for the cameras, just a hand on a shoulder. "Same time next year," he said quietly. Louie smiled, the tired kind that comes after tears. Same time next year, NBC buried the footage of that October taping. For several years, it was simply a night that had not made it to tape, but things find their way out. Dennis Farwell kept his journal. He never sold it, never published it, until he donated it to a television archive in 2011, 3 years after he retired. The relevant pages were digitized and eventually shared by a researcher in 2019. And then there was Johnny. In the spring of 1994, in a radio conversation recorded for a profile piece and never meant for broadcast, Johnny Carson was asked about moments from the show that he carried with him. He mentioned several, and then, almost incidentally, he mentioned October 4th, 1988. He was brief. He did not name Louie. He described it as a night when a comedian came in carrying something too heavy and the show just stopped being a show. He said, "I sat on the floor with him. We talked. It was the most real conversation I ever had on that stage. And I've had a lot of conversations on that stage." The interviewer noted that Carson went quiet after saying it, that he seemed for a moment to go somewhere else. Then he changed the subject. Louie Anderson referenced that night exactly once in public. In a 2018 podcast interview in passing, without details, he said, "There was a night on Carson's show where I fell apart. Johnny sat down with me on the floor. He said something I needed to hear. He did not say what. He just said it changed what the act was about. After that night, I stopped writing for my dad and started writing for whoever was in the room. That turned out to be better comedy anyway." A pause. The host waited. "My dad never came to a show," Louie said, "but after that night, I stopped needing him too." Louie kept working. He came back to The Tonight Show twice more before Carson retired in 1992. Both appearances were among the best he ever gave. Sharper, warmer, rooted in something audiences could feel but not quite name. He went on to host Family Feud, to win an Emmy Award in 2016 for playing a mother in the series Baskets, a performance that surprised everyone who had only known him as a stand-up comedian, and surprised nobody who had read the 9 pages of Dennis Farwell's journal, because the warmth Louie brought to playing a mother was built, in part, from the decades he spent trying to understand a father. The gentleness in the performance came from the same place the comedy had always come from. The particular tenderness of a child who grew up in a hard house and decided, somewhere along the way, that softness was not weakness, that softness was survival. Johnny Carson retired on May 22, 1992. He sent Louie Anderson a handwritten note when Louie got the Family Feud hosting job. Louie shared it publicly after Carson's death in 2005 with permission from Carson's estate. The note said, "I always knew you were going to find the right audience for what you were carrying. You found them. Keep going. J." Louie Anderson died on January 21, 2022. He was 68 years old. The tributes that flooded in returned again and again to the same quality: his warmth, his honesty, the way he made people feel that their pain was visible and manageable, and maybe, with the right angle of light, even a little bit funny. A woman in Minneapolis wrote in a tribute that Louie's bit about growing up poor had in 1992 made her father laugh for the first time in years. He had stopped laughing, she wrote. Louie talked about soup made from the same ingredients as our own soup, and something opened up. My dad laughed until he cried. Louie made our family feel less alone. That is what all the tributes were reaching for but could not quite catch. Louie Anderson made people feel less alone, not through performance, through exposure, through the particular courage of getting on a stage and saying, "Here is what I carry. Here is where it comes from. Here is how I've learned to walk with it." On the floor of an NBC soundstage on October 4, 1988, Johnny Carson sat beside a man who had temporarily run out of the strength to carry it, and said nothing particularly wise or specifically therapeutic. He just sat there. He shared something of his own. He stayed until the other man was ready to stand. In the language of The Tonight Show, that was unprecedented. In the language of human beings, it was simply what you do. You sit down, you stay, you do not reach for the commercial break. And then, when the person next to you is ready, you stand up together. If this story reached something in you, subscribe to this channel right now. We tell true stories about the moments behind the moments, the conversations that happened before the cameras started or after they stopped, the human beings underneath the legends. Share this with someone who understands what it means to carry something heavy into a room full of people and try to make it funny. Someone who knows what that costs. Someone who needs to hear that it is okay to put it down for a minute, that the audience will still be there when you are ready to pick it up again. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? And has there ever been someone in your life who sat down on the floor next to you when you could not stand up? Tell me their name. Let's make sure they are remembered, because the funniest people you know are usually carrying something the rest of us cannot see. And the greatest gift you can give them is to sit down beside them when they fall, to not reach for the commercial break, to stay on the floor until they are ready. Louie Anderson was always ready, eventually. He always found his way back to standing. Do not wait for the right moment to say the thing you need to say. The show keeps moving. The lights keep changing. And sometimes the person you are waiting to tell is gone before you find the courage. Tell them now. Tonight. Whatever it is, Louie would have wanted you to. Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and share this story with someone who needs to hear it.